Women are not born to cheat. Let's start there, because contrary to what broken minds and bitter narratives keep repeating, women don't wake up one day and decide to betray love. It doesn't begin in the body, it begins in the soul. A woman cheats only after she's been emotionally starved, psychologically neglected, or spiritually disrespected over and over again, not because she's heartless, but because her heart has been unheard for far too long. You see, women thrive on connection, not just romance but presence, and when that presence fades, when her words are no longer heard, when her efforts are no longer seen, and when her value is taken for granted, that's when her loyalty begins to fracture. No, it's not because she's unfaithful by nature. It's because she's been carrying the weight of an emotional drought. A woman will only cheat if her soul becomes so invisible in a relationship that she no longer recognizes herself in it. Let's talk truth now. A woman doesn't cheat when another man gives her attention. She cheats when the man she loves stops giving her attention. She doesn't cheat because she wants options. She cheats because the one she chose stopped choosing her back. You want to know when a woman walks away from the man she once prayed for, when she becomes the only one fighting for a connection that's supposed to be mutual, when she is left asking questions that are met with silence, when her vulnerability is mocked instead of protected, when she's more alone with you than she ever was without you. You cannot keep a woman in love with promises you don't live out. A woman will only cheat if her emotional needs are neglected to the point where she no longer recognizes the difference between loyalty and self-abandonment. Yes, there are exceptions. Some people cheat because of character, not circumstance. But the majority of women, the ones who give their hearts completely, don't stray for fun. They stray when they feel forgotten. They cheat when their love becomes a burden instead of a blessing. They cheat when the very relationship meant to empower them starts draining them instead. And let's be brutally honest, women remember everything, not because they're petty, but because they're built to nurture, to care deeply, to notice the little things. So when you stop noticing her efforts, her silence, her pain, she starts to internalize that she's no longer valuable. And what do humans do when they feel worthless in one space? They seek validation in another. But here's the dangerous part. When a woman cheats, it's rarely just physical. It's emotional, it's psychological. It means she has already let go, long before her actions showed it. It means she has cried all her tears, begged in all her silence, and bled in all her patience. So don't tell me she cheated without cause. Ask yourself what storm she had to survive alone before she reached that breaking point. Relationships are not built on attraction. They're built on attention. They survive not on grand gestures, but on consistency. A woman will remain loyal to a man who makes her feel seen, heard, and safe, not perfect, but present, not rich, but real, not a savior, but a supporter. A woman cheats only when her worth is silenced, when she's treated like an option in a life she once prioritized, when her love becomes a transaction instead of a treasure, and even then, she wrestles with it, she fights it, because deep down she never wanted to let go. She wanted to be fought for. She wanted to be reminded that she was still the one. So if you ever find yourself asking, why would she cheat? Ask first, what did she lose in this relationship before she lost herself? Because women don't cheat for thrill. They cheat when their heart is homeless. And to the women listening, this is not permission to betray, but a call to wake up. If you're in a relationship that is destroying your spirit, your dignity, your peace, don't cheat, leave. Don't become what broke you. Don't compromise your own integrity to feel whole again. You deserve a love where your loyalty is reciprocated, your softness is respected, and your presence is cherished, not just tolerated. So no, women don't just cheat. They collapse emotionally, spiritually, quietly, until one day the silence explodes. Protect your peace, value your worth, and never stay where your soul is slowly dying. No woman wakes up one morning and decides to destroy the very home she once prayed for. No woman walks into a relationship thinking of betrayal. Women are not naturally wired to cheat. They are wired to connect, to nurture, to give and give until there's nothing left. But what happens when that giving turns into a quiet ache? What happens when the love she offers is taken for granted, day after day, year after year? That's when emotional neglect begins to rot the foundation of loyalty. And it doesn't happen in one moment. It happens in 1,000 moments of being unseen, unheard, and unfelt. Emotional neglect isn't always loud. In fact, it's silent. It shows up in the way a man stops looking into her eyes when she speaks. It hides behind the phone he scrolls through while she pours her heart out. It lives in the nights where she reaches out for connection and is met with indifference. The most dangerous form of abandonment isn't when someone physically leaves. It's when they stay but withdraw everything that once made them feel present. Emotional neglect is the quiet death of intimacy, and women feel it long before they ever act on it. She begins to question her worth, not because she forgot it, but because the man she gave her heart to stopped reminding her of it. When she used to walk into the room, he noticed. Now she can sit across the table and feel invisible. When she used to speak, he listened. Now her words bounce off walls that no longer echo anything back. Emotional neglect doesn't scream. It whispers to a woman that she's alone in something that once felt like home. A woman can survive without roses. She can survive without luxury. But she cannot survive being emotionally starved in a space that was supposed to nourish her soul. She doesn't crave a perfect man. She craves presence. And when presence disappears, her loyalty slowly begins to fade. Not because she wants to cheat, but because the relationship she once invested her entire being into is now bankrupt of intimacy. People think cheating starts with lust. That's a lie. For most women, it starts with loneliness. Not the kind you feel when you're single, but the kind you feel while lying beside someone who no longer sees you. And in that loneliness, she begins to search, not for bodies, but for warmth. Not for a fling, but for understanding. Someone who will hear the silence behind her words. Someone who will look into her eyes and see the exhaustion she's too tired to explain. Emotional neglect is not just hurtful, it is erosive. It eats away at a woman's self-esteem, at her sense of safety, and at her emotional trust. And here's the truth many won't admit. Women don't cheat to leave, they cheat to feel alive. When a woman steps outside the relationship, it's rarely because she doesn't love anymore. It's because she no longer feels loved. She no longer feels significant, and the emotional gap becomes so wide that someone else's attention feels like oxygen to a soul that's been suffocating in silence. The affair is not always physical. Sometimes it's a conversation. Sometimes it's a lingering text. Sometimes it's a man who simply listens to her pain without dismissing it. That's how emotional neglect makes a woman vulnerable, not because she's weak, but because she's been strong for too long without support. And yet, society shames her, labels her, condemns her without asking what storms she walked through alone. They don't ask how many nights she cried without being held. They don't ask how many times she apologized for wanting basic affection. They don't ask what it cost her to keep loving a man who slowly stopped loving her back. She becomes the villain, but no one talks about how emotional neglect is a silent form of emotional abuse. Just because he didn't raise his voice doesn't mean he didn't break her spirit. There's a wound in women that the world often ignores. The wound of being emotionally dismissed. A woman will carry the weight of the home, the children, the schedule, the finances, and still show up for the relationship. But when she's met with coldness, with passivity, with a man who only remembers her when he needs something, that's when the foundation begins to crack. Love cannot live where attention dies. No matter how loyal she is, no matter how deep her love runs, if she feels emotionally abandoned, she begins to emotionally detach. And what people fail to understand is this: emotional detachment happens long before infidelity does. By the time a woman cheats, her heart has already left. Her laughter, her openness, her affection, they've all withered under the weight of emotional silence. She didn't cheat to hurt someone. She cheated because she was already hurting. And no one saw it, not even the man who once swore to protect her soul. But here's something deeper. When a woman is emotionally neglected, it doesn't just damage the relationship, it damages her inner world. She begins to internalize the silence as her fault. She thinks, maybe I'm asking for too much. Maybe I'm not enough. Maybe he's tired of me. And in that self-blame, she loses her light. And sometimes it's another man who reminds her that she was never the problem. It's another man who sees the power in her words, the beauty in her presence, the wisdom in her soul. That's the danger of neglect. It creates space for someone else to do what you stopped doing. But let's not misrepresent this. Cheating is not justified. It's a response, not a solution. Betrayal never brings healing, and even when a woman feels emotionally starved, stepping outside the relationship will always come with its own damage. However, that doesn't mean we should ignore the cause. If we want to prevent infidelity, we must first address emotional malnourishment. You cannot expect a woman to stay loyal to a connection that is slowly killing her spirit. You cannot expect her to feel fulfilled by presence that is absent, love that is lazy, or commitment that is mechanical. Emotional neglect is more dangerous than we think because it's subtle. It's not the big fights that ruin relationships. It's the quiet distance, the forgotten compliments, the overlooked anniversaries, the disengaged conversations, the refusal to be emotionally available. When a woman reaches out with her heart and time after time she is met with coldness, she begins to close off. She becomes numb, not because she wants to, but because it hurts too much to keep feeling. There are men who think loyalty is enough, that providing financially is enough, that not cheating is enough. But a woman doesn't stay for the things you don't do. She stays for what you do, for the effort, the tenderness, the emotional availability. She stays for how you look at her when she's talking, for how you respond when she's overwhelmed, for how you protect not just her body, but her heart. The man who knows how to emotionally feed his woman will never have to worry about her loyalty. Because loyalty isn't about fear of losing you. It's about being fulfilled with you. When a woman is emotionally filled, she becomes more loyal, more radiant, more alive. But when that emotional intimacy dries up, so does her willingness to keep pouring into an empty cup. And in that dry place, temptation lives, not because she's immoral, but because she's human, and humans crave connection, crave intimacy, crave to be seen. A woman doesn't need everything. She just needs to feel that she matters, that she's appreciated, that she's desired, that her heart is still being held with care. Because when she feels emotionally fed, the idea of cheating never even crosses her mind. But when she is starving for emotional intimacy and no one sees it, no one addresses it, and no one nourishes it, then yes, that's when emotional neglect becomes the breeding ground for betrayal. A woman cheats not because she lacks morals, but because the relationship has long lacked meaning. And meaning is always born from presence, intention, and emotional engagement. Women are not emotional gamblers. They don't trade loyalty for excitement. They don't burn down their peace just for a moment of passion. When a woman cheats, it's not about the thrill, it's about the void. A space inside her that's been aching for connection, for warmth, for understanding. She isn't chasing fireworks. She's craving a steady flame. something she can lean into, something that reminds her that she still matters, that she is still visible in a world where she has felt slowly erased. People often misjudge the reasons behind a woman's betrayal. They label her as reckless, impulsive, attention hungry. They assume she's weak for crossing a line, but they never ask what pushed her to the edge. They see the act, but not the silence that preceded it. They judge the moment she slipped, but ignore the months, sometimes years, where she stood alone in a relationship that gave her everything but presence. For women, infidelity is rarely the pursuit of pleasure. It is the search for connection that got buried under routine, neglect, and emotional starvation. She cheats when her heart has already drifted, not because she was looking, but because she kept feeling invisible, because every conversation became a checklist, every interaction became transactional, because her smiles started to feel forced and her laughter felt like a performance. She cheats because someone finally listened, not just heard her words, but truly listened to the silence between her sentences, listened to the pain she had normalized. Someone finally made her feel that her thoughts had value again. And when connection arrives in a space that's been emotionally barren, it feels like oxygen after years of shallow breathing. It doesn't begin with a kiss, it begins with a conversation that touches her mind before it touches her body. A conversation where someone actually sees the details her partner overlooks, the way she pauses before she speaks, the way her eyes carry stories she never gets to tell, the way her soul softens when someone gives her safe space. That's where it begins, with emotional intimacy, with being seen without performance, with being valued without condition. It's not the thrill of the forbidden, it's the comfort of finally feeling chosen. For most women, cheating is not rebellion, it's relief. It's the first time in a long time she feels emotionally held. She isn't chasing drama, she's chasing peace. She isn't trying to break hearts, she's trying to heal her own. There's a myth that women cheat because they're impulsive or unstable. But the truth is, it takes a long emotional journey before she even crosses that line. Most of the time, she spent months suppressing her needs, silencing her desires, pretending everything is fine while slowly losing the parts of her that once felt alive. So when someone steps in with presence, with attentiveness, with genuine emotion, it doesn't feel like a scandal, it feels like a rescue, and yet she gets condemned, labeled as disloyal, branded as broken. No one talks about how emotionally malnourished she was before the affair. No one asks how many times she tried to communicate and was dismissed, how many nights she cried without being comforted, how many days she felt like a stranger in her own home. No one wants to admit that her actions were not born out of lust, but out of emotional hunger, that before another man touched her body, he touched her loneliness, that he didn't just offer attention, he offered presence. And sometimes, presence is the most seductive thing a woman can experience after years of being emotionally ignored. Cheating, for many women, is a cry for closeness, a desperate attempt to feel what they've stopped feeling in their own relationship. It's not about escaping responsibility, it's about escaping emotional abandonment. Because when you're in a relationship where you have to beg for affection, beg for eye contact, beg for a meaningful conversation, you begin to wonder if love even exists anymore. And when that wondering turns into hopelessness, you start searching, not because you want to cheat, but because you want to feel alive again. And that aliveness doesn't come from danger, it comes from connection. Deep, soulful, emotional connection, the kind that makes you feel safe to be vulnerable again, the kind that makes your heart soften after years of emotional numbness, the kind that restores the parts of you that forgot what affection felt like. Women don't cheat for adrenaline. They cheat because something inside them has gone cold, and when warmth returns, they cling to it like survival. There's a reason why emotional affairs are so common among women. Because before she ever crosses the physical line, she forms an emotional bond. She gets addicted to the way he listens, to the way he makes her feel interesting again, desired again, seen again. She begins to feel like a woman, not just a role. Not just a wife or a mother or a caretaker, but a woman with a soul that deserves intimacy. She doesn't need grand gestures. She needs consistency. She needs someone who won't just share her bed, but share her mind, her fears, her inner world. When emotional connection is missing, everything else begins to collapse. Women are emotional beings by nature, and when that need is ignored, the relationship becomes a shell, a routine, a cold transaction between two people playing roles they no longer feel connected to. And in that emptiness, temptation becomes believable, not because she's immoral, but because she's emotionally dying and no one seems to notice, and so it happens, not out of recklessness, but out of need. Out of a desire to feel understood, to feel wanted without having to ask for it, to feel cherished, not just tolerated. And the pain of cheating doesn't always come from the act itself. It comes from what led to it. The long road of being emotionally dismissed. The nights she went to sleep questioning her value. The mornings she woke up feeling emotionally alone, even in a shared bed. People always talk about the betrayal of cheating, but they forget there's another betrayal that comes first. The betrayal of emotional neglect. The betrayal of a man who stopped showing up, who stopped being curious about her soul, who stopped noticing the way her eyes changed when she was hurting. That's the real beginning of infidelity, when she stops feeling emotionally safe, when the relationship becomes a place of loneliness instead of love. That's when her heart starts wandering, long before her body ever does, and it's not always another man. Sometimes it's just a friendship, a deep conversation, a sense of emotional home she hasn't felt in a long time. And that emotional intimacy becomes addictive because she remembers what it felt like to be emotionally held. She remembers what it's like to be listened to without being judged, to be admired without needing to perform. And in that space, loyalty begins to feel less like a virtue and more like a cage. But even in her betrayal, there is brokenness, there is regret, because women don't cheat without consequence. They carry guilt deeply. They carry shame even when no one knows, because they never wanted to become that woman. They never wanted to step outside their values. But when a woman is emotionally deprived for long enough, even her strongest boundaries begin to erode. It's not about justification. It's about understanding the emotional drought that made her vulnerable in the first place. The truth is, if emotional connection is alive, infidelity rarely shows up. When a woman feels seen, heard, and valued, she has no desire to seek anything outside. But when the emotional well runs dry, she begins to thirst, not for chaos, but for closeness, not for pleasure, but for peace. She's not looking to play games, she's looking to be felt. So don't confuse her cheating with thrill-seeking. It's not about the chase, it's about finally being caught by someone who sees her worth, someone who reminds her that she is not invisible, that she is still a woman with beauty, value, depth, and desire. It's not the thrill she's chasing, it's the connection she's been starved of for far too long. Cheating doesn't happen in a moment, it brews in silence, it builds in the shadows, it lingers in unspoken needs and unmet emotions. By the time a woman cheats, she's already been gone emotionally for a long time. She didn't fall into someone's arms overnight. She drifted away over months, maybe years, while pretending everything was fine. The truth is, cheating isn't the beginning of betrayal, it's the result of it. It's what happens when emotional wounds go untreated, when conversations go unheard, when love becomes routine and affection becomes obligation. The affair isn't where the damage starts, it's where it finally shows. A woman doesn't destroy her home just for fun. She doesn't sabotage her own heart without having first tried to salvage what was left. She stays through the discomfort, she stays while she's hurting, She stays even when she's misunderstood, neglected, and pushed aside. She stays out of loyalty, out of hope, out of the belief that things will get better. But when she's been emotionally starved long enough, when the intimacy she once shared feels like a ghost, she doesn't cheat as a beginning. She cheats as an ending, a final symptom of a relationship that already lost its heartbeat. The mistake most people make is thinking cheating is where the story starts, that it's the root of the problem, but cheating is never the root, it's the fruit. It's the final expression of 1,000 unmet needs, of consistent emotional disconnect, of a heart that kept reaching out but eventually stopped trying. Before a woman cheats, she checks out. She becomes quiet. She becomes distant, not because she wants to be cold, but because she's tired of fighting for closeness, tired of initiating every conversation, tired of begging for time, for attention, for affection. Tired of being the only one trying to keep the relationship alive. By the time she turns to someone else, she's already grieved the relationship. She's already had the arguments in her head. She's already cried the tears in private. She's already gone through the phases of guilt and confusion. The cheating didn't come from nowhere. It came from emotional abandonment, from the feeling that she was giving her all and getting crumbs in return. From the realization that no matter how much she tried, she still felt lonely in a relationship that used to be her safe place. That's what people don't see. They see the betrayal, but not the breakdown. They see the affair, but not the emotional starvation that preceded it. They judge the moment she stepped outside, but they ignore the months where she sat inside, quietly suffering, silently fading. They call her disloyal, but they forget how many times she stayed loyal to someone who stopped showing up emotionally. She didn't cheat because she was reckless. She cheated because she was exhausted. Exhausted from carrying the weight of a one-sided relationship. Exhausted from trying to reignite a flame that the other person kept letting burn out. When a woman cheats, it's not an act of desire. It's a cry for connection. A cry that was ignored too many times in the past. She didn't wake up and decide to break someone's heart. She woke up after 1,000 nights of feeling like hers didn't matter, like her presence was taken for granted, like her silence was more comfortable to her partner than her truth. And so, the cheating wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was the final stop after a long journey of being emotionally dismissed. People think cheating just happens. It doesn't, it builds. It brews in the absence of emotional safety. It grows in the soil of distance and emotional neglect. A woman who feels seen, heard, and emotionally secure rarely strays. But when she's consistently overlooked, when her emotional world is ignored, when her affection is returned with apathy, eventually, she begins to seek connection somewhere else, not because she wants to break the relationship, but because the relationship already stopped feeding her soul. What most people never talk about is the emotional cheating that comes before the physical one, the way her heart starts to disconnect long before her body does, the way her spirit starts to detach when every conversation turns into conflict. When every vulnerable moment is met with defensiveness or disinterest, when every attempt to bridge the gap is met with cold responses, she doesn't leave physically at first, she leaves emotionally, slowly, quietly, piece by piece, until she's just a shell of the woman she used to be in that relationship. And when someone else comes along and sees her, truly sees her, when they speak to her soul instead of just her surface, she feels something she hasn't felt in a long time, aliveness. Not temptation, not rebellion, but aliveness, like her existence matters again, like someone is curious about her, not just comfortable with her, like she doesn't have to shrink herself just to keep the peace. That's what opens the door, not lust, not weakness, but a desperate hunger for connection that's been ignored for far too long. And still, the blame always falls on her. as if she woke up one day and just decided to destroy everything. But no one asks how many nights she cried quietly into her pillow. No one asks how many times she sat across the dinner table feeling like a stranger in her own relationship. No one asks how many conversations she tried to initiate, only to be met with silence or defensiveness. The affair wasn't the moment things went wrong. It was the moment everything that was wrong finally surfaced. And even in her mistake, she's not proud. She's not celebrating the pain it causes. Women carry guilt deeply. They replay the moments, they analyze the choices, but by the time they cheat, they've already asked for help 1,000 times, and each time they were dismissed, told they were too emotional, too needy, too dramatic. So eventually they stop asking, and when the emotional oxygen runs out, they don't walk away. They collapse, and sometimes that collapse looks like betrayal. But the betrayal didn't start with them. It started with the emotional neglect that came before. The world has a way of shaming women for their response while ignoring what provoked it. It's easier to point at the cheating than to acknowledge the slow emotional death that came first. But healing doesn't come from blame. It comes from understanding. And the truth is, cheating isn't a cause, it's a consequence. A signal that the relationship was already suffering, that the intimacy was already lost, that the connection was already broken long before the physical boundary was crossed. You see, when a woman cheats, she's not asking for forgiveness from the world. She's asking for someone to understand the pain that led her there, not to justify it, not to excuse it, but to acknowledge that it didn't come out of nowhere. That before she was unfaithful, she was unseen. Before she lied, she was unheard. Before she wandered, she was wounded, and she didn't act out of cruelty, she acted out of desperation. Desperation for love, for connection, for something real again. And that's what people need to understand. Cheating is the result. It's the final manifestation of years of emotional erosion, of love that turned into logistics, of passion that turned into performance, of communication that turned into compliance. She didn't cheat to destroy what she had. She cheated because what she had already felt destroyed, not in the external appearance of the relationship, but in the invisible threads of emotional closeness that had quietly snapped one by one. So when you see a woman who's cheated, don't just ask what she did. Ask what she felt before she did it. Ask what she was missing. Ask how long she waited for connection before she reached for it somewhere else. Because most of the time, the betrayal you see is only the final expression of a woman who was emotionally betrayed first. And if you want to understand her actions, you have to understand her emptiness. Because cheating never begins with seduction. It begins with neglect, with silence, with absence. And by the time the world sees the act, the damage has already been done in 1,000 quiet ways that no one ever noticed. When you know in your soul that something is dying, you have a choice that defines not just your relationship, but your character, integrity or betrayal, walking away or breaking trust, being honest or being hidden. And the truth is, every woman at some point in her life is faced with this moment. When love starts to fade, when intimacy turns cold, when communication becomes a battlefield instead of a bridge. And in that moment, there's a fork in the road. One path leads to quiet dignity, the other to silent destruction. You either leave with your soul intact or you stay and slowly dismantle your own sense of self-respect. There's nothing empowering about cheating, nothing graceful about deception, nothing strong about betrayal. It might feel like an escape in the beginning, like a remedy to your ache, like a secret that finally gives you attention, affection, or understanding. But it's a false cure, a momentary relief with a long, lasting scar, because no matter how broken the relationship may be, betrayal adds more wounds than it heals. It makes you forget the person you once were. The person who once loved clean, who once valued truth, who once stood tall in her own integrity. Integrity is what keeps your spirit clean when your world feels like it's falling apart. It's the voice inside that whispers, you don't need to lie to be free. You don't need to cheat to feel loved. You don't need to destroy someone to find yourself. It's the voice that tells you, if this isn't working, leave. Don't burn the house down from the inside just because the walls feel cold. Don't bring in someone else to feel alive while someone else is still giving you their loyalty. Because loyalty isn't just about staying. It's about how you behave while you stay. It's easy to justify cheating when you're hurting, when your needs aren't being met, when you've become invisible in your own relationship, when conversations feel like war zones and your affection is either rejected or ignored. But even in that pain, even in that emotional drought, you still have a choice. You can cheat or you can leave, and walking away may be the harder path, but it's the higher one. Because it allows you to walk into your next chapter with your conscience unburdened, your energy clean, and your self-respect intact. Leaving takes courage, not because you're giving up, but because you're choosing truth over temporary comfort. Because you're deciding to be honest about what's broken rather than pretending and finding solace in secret places. You leave because you realize that betrayal isn't just about being caught, it's about what it does to your own soul. You leave because you refuse to become someone you can't respect. You leave because you want to build, not destroy. There is something sacred about walking away before you break someone, something powerful about saying, "This no longer feeds my spirit, and I refuse to pretend." That is strength. That is feminine power, not in cheating, not in manipulation, but in truth, in the ability to be transparent even when it hurts, in the ability to say, "I won't stay and lie to you while I build a secret life behind your back. I won't sleep next to you while thinking of someone else. I won't destroy you to heal me." The damage of betrayal goes deeper than most people realize. It shatters more than trust, it shatters identity. When you cheat, you take someone else's sense of safety and rip it apart without warning. You rewrite their idea of love. You rewrite their belief in people. You take their vulnerability, their naked trust, and you use it against them. And long after the affair is over, long after the apologies are made, the scar remains. Not because people can't forgive, but because the memory of being lied to, of being played, of being replaced, those things don't disappear easily. You can't undo betrayal, but you can choose to never be the person who causes it. No relationship is perfect. Every connection has its droughts, its storms, its silent seasons, but cheating should never be your response to discomfort. If your needs aren't being met, speak. If you feel emotionally abandoned, express it. If you're feeling disconnected, fight for the connection. But if the other person stops trying, stops listening, stops caring, then leave. Don't cheat. Let them go with the dignity they gave you when they chose to love you in the beginning. Let them go without turning them into the villain. Let them go with honesty, not hidden agendas. Cheating is often glamorized in today's world, painted as an act of liberation or revenge. But that illusion is dangerous. Because real liberation doesn't come from lies, it comes from self-respect. Real power doesn't come from hurting someone who once trusted you. It comes from honoring your truth even when it's hard. And real closure doesn't come from making someone else feel small. It comes from walking away clean, from choosing a higher path, from choosing yourself without destroying someone else in the process. There's a difference between outgrowing someone and disrespecting them, between no longer being in love and dishonoring the love that was once there. When a relationship ends, it doesn't mean everything was fake. It means it served its purpose. It taught you what it was meant to teach you, but cheating turns the ending into a wound. It leaves behind bitterness instead of peace. It robs both people of a graceful exit. And most of all, it makes you betray yourself before you betray anyone else. Because the first person you lie to when you cheat is you. You lie to yourself about your values. You lie to yourself about your needs. You lie to yourself about the kind of woman you are. You pretend this is freedom when deep down it's fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of confronting the truth. Fear of walking away without a backup plan. But real women, powerful women, emotionally evolved women, they face their fear. They walk away before they betray. They break the chain before they shatter trust. This isn't about being perfect. It's about being real. About standing in your power without compromising your integrity. About saying, I'm done, without needing to be destructive. And that is a rare kind of beauty. A woman who leaves because she respects herself and the other person too much to pretend. A woman who chooses truth over tactics. A woman who knows that her worth isn't measured by how many people desire her, but by how deeply she honors her own emotional values. Every time you choose not to cheat, even when the temptation is strong, even when the pain is real, you reaffirm your own strength. You remind yourself that dignity is more valuable than desire, that peace is more powerful than passion, that who you are when no one's watching matters more than what you do in the dark, and that's what creates the kind of woman who doesn't just attract good love, but keeps it, because when you live with integrity, you attract people who see that in you, who mirror that back to you, who are drawn not to your appearance, but to your honesty, not to your charm, but to your character. And that kind of connection, that kind of love, only comes when you're willing to walk away from what doesn't serve you without needing to betray someone to feel powerful again. So yes, you can stay in a dead relationship and cheat, but it will cost you far more than it gives. Or you can choose the path of self-respect. You can leave with your soul intact. You can look yourself in the mirror and say, I did this the right way. You can walk into your next chapter without guilt, without shame, without secrets. Because you know you didn't destroy someone else just to find yourself. You left with grace. You ended it with truth. You chose integrity over betrayal.